Salawat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad. We're now going to start the program. Salawat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad. We're now going to start the program with a recitation of Quran from Ibrahim.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذا قرئ القرآن فاستمعوا له وأنصتوا لعلكم ترحمون واذكر ربك في نفسك تضرعا وخيفة ودون الجهر من القول بالغدو والآصال ولا تكن من الغافلين إن الذين عند ربك لا يستكبرون عن عبادته ويسبحونه وله يسجدون بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يسألونك عن الأنفال قل الأنفال لله والرسول فاتقوا الله وأصلحوا ذات بينكم وأطيعوا الله ورسوله إن كنتم مؤمنين إنما المؤمنون الذين إذا ذكر الله وجلت قلوبهم وإذا تليت عليهم آياته زادتهم إيمانا وعلى ربهم يتوكلون الذين يقيمون الصلاة ومما رزقناهم ينفقون أولئك هم المؤمنون حقا لهم درجات عند ربهم ومغفرة ورزق كريم صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much for that beautiful recitation. We're now very fortunate to have Jehangir Malik, OBE, speaking to us on Muslim civil society, tradition, transformation, and tomorrow. Let's welcome him with Salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Please. Jehangir Malik OBE is a civil society social impact leader and strategic advisor with over 30 years of experience leading a range of civil society organizations across the UK, US, and South Asia. He's the director for the British Muslim Civil Society Report, highlighting the role of faith communities in strengthening civil society. Recent roles include strategic advisor to UNICEF on philanthropy, VC SEP, director of British Red Cross during the COVID crisis, and leading Muslim organizations like the Muslim Aid and Islamic Relief. He holds various board and commissioner positions, including the Cardiff Centre for Study of Islam in the UK, and many others. He was awarded an OBE in 2010 for his years of humanitarian work, and we're very fortunate to have him today. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa ala alihi sahbihi man wala amma ba'd. Thank you very much for the kind invitation to be here today with you all, and for me to be able to share some reflections on observations on an area that for the topic for tonight, for the British Muslim Civil Society, tradition, transition, transformation. There was another title in my head which Miqdad and I discussed, and that was a bit more slightly edgier one, which meant that British Muslim civil society fit for purpose or slightly in the relic stages. But anyway, we decided to go for a more suitable title of tradition, transition and transformation. As Miqdad has just kindly give me a small sort of introduction on myself. I've been fortunate enough to work in a variety of different realms in the civil society space, in the charity sector, the humanitarian space, from UK, United States, South Asia, and the likes, heading up a number of organizations. And so I think I come from sort of what you might call a practitioner's point of view. led organizations which are faith-based, faith-inspired, have faith in the framework of their organizational DNA. But along that journey, I think sometimes the faith framework has somewhat lost its sort of essence or spirit in the organization as they've grown and developed and so forth. And we'll come on to some of that at this moment. So now, if you indulge me for a little bit, what we'll start off with is a little sort of slideshow around some of the historical tradition. So if we cast our minds back to just over 60 years ago, a lot of the sort of first generation immigrants, from South Asian backgrounds, settled in the UK. And if we look at some of the statistics that that are on the slide over here, in 1961, the census data polled that there was 50,000 Muslims, and I'm just trying to see the sort of slide over here, that there was a handful of mosques. And if you kind of look over the decades from 1961 to 2021, we're at 3.8 million, and the sort of demographic largely being 50%, over 50% being South Asian population. And now we have a sort of mosque infrastructure across the country that started out about 7, I think it was, recorded in 1961, to over 1,500 to 2,000 mosques and Islamic centers across the country at this moment in time, in that 60-year time period. Which, if you think about it, is quite a relatively short time period for such a growth. And if we look at the 2001 census and we look at specifically at the figures of Muslims, we'll see that the Muslim population was at 1.6 million and 2.7 million. That constituted 2.7% of the population. A decade later, if we look at the next set of figures, you'll see that Muslims went on from 1.6 million to 2.7 million, constituting 4.4% of the population. And when we look at the most recent census, we'll end up with a figure of around 3.9 million, where we constitute 6.5% of the population. So we've had about 144% increase in the last 2 decades alone, from 2001 to 2022. Why is that significant? That's significant because we've had a major population boom in terms of numbers, in the number of Muslims within the United Kingdom. And now we're at 6.5% of the population, where only 2 decades ago we were 2.7%. Okay, so that's one factor just to take into consideration. And in terms of religion, what also is interesting to note is that for the first time, no religion was higher than Christianity, but if you combine all the others together, it'll be comparable. Now, Muslim was the largest second faith outside of Christianity and no religion, as it were. So there's a visible presence of faith tradition within the Muslim community, but a declining influence of a religious identity within the wider society. So just something to note at this moment in time, and why is that important, and why is that sort of relevant to today's presentation. Now, a number of these factors, especially with the population boom, indicates a number of factors to take into consideration. The first thing is that we have a very young population, so 50% of our population is under the age of 25. Okay, so we have a very, very young population compared to the national average. And so some of that brings some of the challenges and aspirations that we're just going to be going into. Now, some of you might have remembered the sort of Runnymede report, where it originally came out in 1997 with the Islamophobia report, and then 20 years later, I was on the board of Runnymede Trust at the time. They did a sort of a review on that 20 years later in 2007, 20 years after it was anyway, there was another report that featured about the challenges of Islamophobia that you're all sort of, I'm assuming, very familiar with. Now, a number of reports have come out in that sort of time frame indicating the challenges that Muslims and British Muslims and Islam and Muslims face in the United Kingdom. And I'd just like to sort of highlight a few of these. The backdrop of all of this is, especially in the last decade and a half, 2 decades, the backdrop of Islamophobia and discrimination, the big aspect of identity and integration, loaded terms, but identity and belonging, political representation, media representation, economic and social disparities. The census data will demonstrate that Muslims occupy or live in some of the most poorest boroughs across the country. A young population in those areas that we reside in. I'm from Birmingham, and the likes of Birmingham, Bradford, Manchester, and the likes have a very, very large younger population in that respect, and they live in some of the most poorest areas. Sectarianism, tribalism, and if I can use the term ghettoization, living in insular environments. And fundamentally, there is a lack of Muslim contextual leadership. There is a lack of understanding of the context, the operating context of our environment. Hence, the sort of leadership seems to be at odds with understanding the environment, and also the one with an understanding of the younger population. So let's just focus a little bit on that younger population for a second. The younger population. Now, if we look at statistics at a wider sense, 70% of young Britons, according to the last census, since 16 to 29, identify as having no religion, whereas 10% identify as Catholics, 7% as Anglicans, and 6% as Muslims. So there is a very large segment of the younger population that do not identify with any kind of religious identity. And so therefore, the prevalence of a secularization, especially amongst the younger population, is quite at a high level. And so the impact on that with our younger populations is something to take into consideration. Now, another another statistic that I'm going to sort of be sharing with you on the next slide is just an indication. I'm not an expert in any shape or form on prison populations, but for those of you that have sort of, this was an interesting, alarming factor as well amongst the younger, especially amongst the younger population, that the Muslim population within prisons is at about 15,000, which is 18% of the prison population, whereas where the percentage share of the general population is about 7%. So we're almost 6.5 to 18% is 3 times overrepresented in prison at 15,000 a population out of a complete total population of just under 88,000, if I'm not mistaken. Now, I was looking at this and reflecting on it again. Ghettoization, sense of lack of belonging, sense of lack of identity, and a younger population. Okay, maybe not so much in leafy suburbs of Harrow, but if you go to Birmingham, Bradford, outer areas where there's a high concentration. Now, growing up in Birmingham, my friend here, Rashid, is from Small Heath, and I'm from Spark Hill. These are the areas which Peaky Blinders, the gangs of Peaky Blinders and so forth, were the environment in operating. Now, gang warfare, gangs, territory, and all the rest of it was rife back 30, 40 years ago. It is epidemic proportions now in these areas. So young people, way out of poverty is through organized crime, drugs, which starts at the age in primary school, 8, 9, 10, 11, okay, at a very young age. Now, I'm not going to sort of dig deep here and elaborate on sort of why we're so highly represented in the prison populations, but what I will say is that in the inner city areas in which there's a very, very high concentration of Muslim populations in, for example, in Spark Hill, in Small Heath, in Alum Rock, and in these areas, the Muslim population in these wards constitutes 80%. 80 to 85% of these areas are Muslim populated, and 50% of that population is under the age of 25, and with the highest crime rates and the highest proportion. So therefore, the likelihood of young people in these particular areas without much guidance, support, statutory and otherwise, are more vulnerable to end up in life of crime and in a perpetual cycle of vulnerability and a perpetual cycle of crime in that respect. So I just wanted to sort of dwell on that big challenge. And I'm sure there's pockets of London and other parts which resemble that, but there is organized county lines and drug lines that operate right throughout the connecting cities, in which that they prey on the vulnerabilities of boys and girls, okay, to push and sell. And so these are some of sort of the social ills and challenges of society. And if you look at sort of on that particular side of things, as it said, the average, I think there was a much more updated figure here, but let's go with this one. The average cost per prison place is £46,696. If you multiply that by 14,000, it was 15,000, it was earlier, you'll end up with a figure of £674 million. So with 18,000 Muslims occupying prison spaces, it's costing the state 674 million. Now, the number of Muslims in prisons has nearly doubled in the last 10 years, and it's just making up under 14,000. And the number of young people in prison is also increasing in that respect. And so why is this relevant? We'll come back to that in a second. There are a number of initiatives that are trying to sort of challenge and all of that. And if I kind of draw now, so I've just kind of painted a picture of a population boom, of increase of young people, of a increase in socioeconomic challenges, marginalization, ghettoization, a lack of belonging, a sense of not fitting in society, as it were. These are all contributors towards a potential explosive situation, and that's erupted into the streets, as it were, when we saw over the summer during the response to the riots and the rest of it. Now, let's look at a prophetic tradition, right? If we look at our faith and our prophetic tradition, we'll come on to the sort of a saying in which that really resonates, but one that's really has been very, very close to me at a personal level. The best of you are those who are most beneficial to others. Okay, the best of you are the most beneficial to others. Right. If that saying of the Prophet ﷺ was enacted, where there was large concentrations of Muslims, there would be great places to live, great places to be, and safe and secure spaces. Nothing could be further from the truth at this moment in time. Now, these certain levels, there is an area in which that people feel comfortable, and I understand people, we reside in these areas largely because of the fact that it's cheap, it's a great starting point and all the rest of it. But in actuality, there's a reason why sometimes these feel like uncomfortable areas and spaces in which that we're not really practicing our faith as the way that it's understood. Now, there might be a proliferation of mosques and centers and communities and Islamic schools and the rest of it, but in actuality, the practice is very, very different. And the mosques and the centers that are in existence in these places are largely stuck in a traditional path in which that they meet their sort of basic functionality. I remember a little, maybe some of you who are older in the room would remember the great late Dr. Zaki Badawi. Okay, he came to Birmingham once, and he was giving a talk, and as maybe early 20-year-old, I was quite frustrated that a lot of the language in the way that's communicated in these mosques and Islamic centers was in Urdu. And I went up to Dr. Zaki, by the way, Allah yarhamah, and said to him, look, Dr. Zaki, the people are not able to connect with the congregation because of the language in which that they're communicating with. It has no connection to a younger population. So I said, look, people were fulfilling the rituals, but there isn't any real message being solidly communicated. And Dr. Zaki, by the way, in his wise ways, said to me, if you hear what's being said, it's better that it's not being translated. It's not being communicated. Okay? Again, a young student trying to air his frustrations, and a wise man saying that there's benefit of it not being in English. And that's quite true, because again, what was being communicated was largely from a traditional space in which that was fit for South Asia, village and so forth, and it wasn't really of relevance to current context. Having said that, change is taking place, but it's still largely not contextual to the environment, and that's what we're operating in. Recently, Visit My Mosque is an annual program that I'm sure you're all familiar with and participated with. And in my mosque in Solihull, we had a congregation like this. We opened the mosque and we gave them the talk. We said about Islam and Muslims and Ramadan and, what do we do? There's lots of interaction. And then we finished the session and we said to the non-Muslims in the area, we said, okay, any questions? Guess what the first question was? Huh? Somebody on this side? Terrorism? Anybody else? Anything else? Common misconceptions and all the rest of it. Anyway, lady put their hand up and say, yeah, what does your faith say about parking? Right? That's all nice. Your religion is good. You're spiritual. That's very good. It's a godly place, and we understand. But you lot park awful, right? And so we can go on about our religion and our faith, but then we park in somebody's driveway and obstruct, right? Causing harm. And when we open ourselves up, it was good that, people were sharing that. I'm the one make the announcements every Friday, every prayer, trying to, encourage people to park. But it's a challenge. Our practice is at odds with our faith. As I remember, again, going back now, when I went to see Yusuf Islam give a talk, and at Oxford University, again, I think it was late 80s, early 90s. Showing you my age here, but late 80s, early 90s, and one of the things he said is, I'm so glad I found Islam before I found the Muslims. Right? He said, I'm so glad, because if it was the other way around, I'm not sure what the outcome would have been. Yeah? Because our practice is bad. It's not good. It is at odds. It's at odds. It's contradicting the prophetic notion of what we're meant to be, and how we're supposed to behave, and how we're supposed to practice, and the like. So therefore, the sort of British Muslim institutions are unfortunately have not transitioned forward to be able to play a role in enabling that social change to take place. So now if we sort of move forward, and in terms of aspirations of the Muslim civil society, our aspirations, should be shaped by the desire to promote positive integration, social justice, the well-being of the community and the Muslim community within the broader UK context. These aspirations reflect a blend of religious values, civic responsibility, and challenges faced by British Muslims and in wider society. Now, I was fortunate enough to spend a year on this report called the British Muslim Civil Society Report, and some of the reports have come before us, and launched it in Parliament with the APPG last year. And we try to sort of reflect upon the understanding, and you can download the report on that sort of website in the British Muslim Civil Society. Dr. Osama Lazmi was at Oxford at the time, and myself, we spent a year in trying to sort of get a snapshot of where the Muslim civil society is at in terms of what the findings are. And, since the early 60s, as it were, we've, I would say, come a long way. This is a snapshot of some of the organizations that exist out there in the wide spectrum of British Muslim civil society organizations. But I think one that has a number of the challenges, but one that's really lacked an upgrade, as it were, if I can use that kind of terminology, are the institutions that are locally place-based and set up for where most communities live. Now, unfortunately, the vast majority of them are still hanging on to tradition. They haven't made that sort of transition yet, and are in desperate need of an upgrade to be able to have contextual approaches to fit for purpose, to be able to make a difference in their community societies. And I'm going to illustrate some of the examples in which that's been done very well, so that just to illustrate the social impact that's made. Now, when the APPG on British Muslims did a number of, when they did a number of reports some time ago, one of them was called The Faith as the Fourth Emergency Service, the British Muslim Charitable Contributions in the UK. And one example in which that we've done exceptionally well of recent times, which for me illustrates that when there's a will, there's an absolute way. Okay? When we actually prioritized it, when the mosques were closed down in COVID for regular worship and prayer, we were forced to be outward facing. That forced a major change in our thinking, saying, okay, we can't just sit here and not do anything. We're going to be a part of an architecture that works in supporting the needs of wider society. And then we were able to collectively, I think, because we were a part of the national response, I was fortunate enough to be a part of an organization called the National Emergency Trust at the time, in which that we were overseeing the distribution of about £100 million to community-based organizations across the country. Unfortunately, there wasn't a large spectrum of Muslim organizations that were drawing down funds on this, but that's a different sort of conversation. But the positive impact of Muslim civil society made during COVID in response to the needs of our communities was noticeable, and it demonstrated the ability to be able to do this. And so volunteering is a part of our DNA and a part of our infrastructure, and when organized in a way that's very positive, this sort of example illustrated that itself. Then volunteering itself is a very, very important sort of thing. Across the survey of British Muslims, 43.4% of respondents volunteered at least once a week, and whereas only 14% of the mainstream public has volunteered once a week over the past 12 years. So the nature of voluntary effort, what we might call khidmah or service to community, is very, very high, especially amongst Muslim population in that respect. So over that time, as more recently, we've had the ability, inshallah, of some of the, especially community of, the formation of EQUIA think tanks, as in looking at the positive contribution of Muslim organizations and communities alike. There's a mosque in Birmingham called the Green Lane Mosque. It's gone through a major organizational transformation. It was one of the most it is one of the most conservative, orthodox conservative mosques in Birmingham. But now, over the last 15 years that it's gone through its transformation in leadership, in its contextual leadership, in its organization, it is now the go-to place for statutory bodies, for organizations, for a variety of number of things. It becomes a reference point for the organization to help steer and challenge and navigate the different sort of organizational, different community challenges within Birmingham. Just conscientious of time. So here we've got an organization, a mosque, that was quite not in touch with the wider society, but only dealt with people that had walked through the doors of the masjid. That went through quite a transformation internally as an organization, which became much more outward facing in dealing with challenges, societal difficulties, from crime to drugs to domestic violence to cancer. Macmillan Cancer Research, Macmillan Cancer Support have got workers there. Department of Work and Pensions have got setups at the Green Lane Mosque. So it's gone through a major transformation. It was recently awarded a £2.2 million investment from central government for building its youth centre. Another example of a mosque and a centre that I was personally involved with during Grenfell when I was Chief Executive of Muslim Aid was Al Manar Muslim Cultural Heritage Centre. Grenfell 1 year on, the mosque man, who were instrumental in playing a supporting role, enabling that sort of change to happen, and that was recognised across the board, across the sector, and the like. So what we're trying to sort of highlight here, what I'm trying to highlight here, is the critical, vital role of British Muslim institutions to be able to, embedded in their respective communities, to be confidently outward-facing and strong in their faith framework, driven by their faith, inspired by their faith tradition, to say, we're here to serve not only our constituency of those who walk through these doors, but we're here to serve at a much wider frame, at a much wider level, and have a wider social sort of impact, as it were. Whilst I was just preparing this presentation, I saw Theos, they do an annual lecture, and I saw, this is going to be on the 26th of November, Archbishop Justin Welby lecture saying, "Beyond bricks and mortar, the case for building communities." And I thought that's an apt reflection of where the church thinks that it's at, because it's got lots of church infrastructure across the entire country. But I don't think, I was asked in a piece of research today about the role of interfaith organizations during the response to the riots. And I said largely irrelevant. Largely irrelevant, because demonstrating that the young people who came out to riot or respond to that riot didn't just listen to a bunch of interfaith guys coming around saying this is how we should do things. We have to recognize that there's generational challenges here in which that young people don't feel a stake in society, don't necessarily listen to the sort of statutory hierarchical structures that exist in place, and you can't just fix it by having, being flippant, by cups of teas and old men coming together and doing symbolic photo shoots of interfaith work without belittling it. But the young people are completely detached from that. And if that's our way of sort of demonstrating relevance, then there's some real deep soul searching to be done if we're unable to connect with the young populations of within our Muslim community. So kind of for a thriving British Muslim civil society, and I'm just going to end on this, I think this is my last slide here. For a thriving British Muslim civil society, I believe there is great amount of scope for faith-inspired leadership, prophetic leadership models, understood that these institutions play a very vital, critical role, driven by an understanding of their faith driving that. And for the institutional building, for it to be absolutely contextual, an understanding of the environment in which that we operate, inclusive, not exclusive, not run by a family that has set it up and they feel it's their rightful place now, inclusive of generational changes and relevant. And they must have fundamental strategic approaches to be able to ensure that they have good governance at the heart of it and a strong financial business model. Some of the mosques that I'm working with at this moment in time, especially in Birmingham, that have undergone these transformations, are widely acclaimed as the reference point for Muslim community pulse check within these cities. So they looked as a valuable understanding when they wanted to understand what was the feeling of the community in response to the riots. They went to these centres to ask. We facilitated roundtables, conversations, police, statutory bodies, young people themselves who had serious grievances about it. So you facilitate an open, inclusive environment for people that you agree with and people that you disagree with. Okay, so that they can feel that these are spaces, not an exclusive club in which that we just do our ritual prayers and all the rest of it, which are an absolutely critical component, but a safe space for us to be able to be a part of in bringing social change, as it were. And then the really fundamental critical one is for intergenerational approaches. Intergenerational approaches meaning having successful succession planning in that process. If you leave young people out, and I'm very blessed to be in an environment where I can see people of multi-generational, young, middle age, and the elders who set up the spaces. But a lot of the environments don't look like what I'm looking at, what I'm seeing here today, and so that's fundamentally critical if we're going to be able to tackle the social changes and challenges that we face in society today. And the last one is that we're looking for confident Muslim institutions that will have wider social impact in society, not just in times of a crisis, not just when a Grenfell happens, not just when the riots happen, not just when COVID or something of a national risk phenomena happens, but as a part of our ongoing DNA in which that we're demonstrating the hadith that was described earlier, the best of you are those who are most beneficial to others, as it were. And that's embodied through the social infrastructure that exists across the country. There's 2,000, up to 2,000 of these institutions. I don't expect all of them to become gold standard centers of excellence, but I think the ones that do become that can be a role model to enable accelerated change within this setup. And I've been fortunate enough to be a part of that social change in Birmingham with at least 3 to 5 centres now. And the sort of proposition here is that these institutions have a valuable role. And I'm so pleased, that when I was here at the fundraiser, was it last year? It was last year, I think, where I was courteously invited of the vision that we saw for the Salam Centre. So in one hand, I feel that I'm preaching to the converted, and you understand that sort of role of the mosque and the Islamic Centre and a welcoming faith centre that enables for that social change to take place, and for wider society to see us as Muslims and our institutions to be of khair, to be of benefit, to be of refuge, to be of sanctity, to be of support, to be of help. And our centres have a major role in enabling for that to happen. Otherwise, the worst case scenario is that you'll end up in a situation like the church network across the country, one by one, being sold off. I've recently taken on the role of consul because my wife is the mayor of Solihull, and I'm visiting all these churches and all these institutions, and I speak to the priests and the elderly, and I say, look, I'm a little bit, I say to them, I don't see any, and you know this, I don't see many young people in this congregation. He said, yes, we made that mistake 30, 40 years ago. We made our mistake 30, 40 years ago of neglecting, of ignoring the younger populations and service provision towards them. So I guess my plea here is learn from the traditions that have come past before us, understand that this is a critical stage in our juncture where 50% of our population is under 25, and if we're going to have successful succession planning which outlives us, then that journey has to start from a very young stage, and it cannot be a closed shop where we know best, as in elders and the likes, and young people come and do this kind of thing. But it has to be an intergenerational approach where young people are part and parcel of the organizational infrastructure that exists to be able to bring, to have a stronger prospect in the future of Islam and Muslims in Britain. Okay, thank you. I've gone over slightly, a couple of minutes, but apologies.
Thank you very much. Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. We now have time for some questions.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for your informative talk. My question is a little bit off topic. As we have a young population, are we contributing higher percentage of taxes compared to our 6% of general population. And if you'll allow me, there's a part B. Somebody's asked me a question to put to you, is that out of the 15,000 Muslim population, are they all male, or is it male, female, and what percentage?
Okay, I think I had it on my statistic on that one. I did want to. I mean, there's a lot of writing on this, and so that's not my expertise. But 96% is male, and 3.8% are female. And what was your other question on that one? Sorry. The
first part was, are we contributing more to taxes compared to our 6% of population?
Well,
percentage-wise.
If we take a city like Birmingham, so now Birmingham has 30% Muslim population, just under 300,000, just over 300,000. Okay, significantly grown. One of the two factors. One is higher population, higher birth rate. Okay, and secondly, higher increase of migration and refugee flows as well. These two factors have contributed to a major increase in population size. The challenge is that still an overwhelming majority of the population resides in some of the most poorest socioeconomic circumstances, which I would say is a recipe for disaster. I grew up in these kind of environments, and many of our friends that didn't go through a process of education ended up in a life of crime and in a perpetual cycle of violence and a ghettoization approach in that respect. And so the contribution towards taxes is very limited because they're not as earning, but once social mobility sort of kicks in and the ability to be able to earn more, but unfortunately socioeconomic activity, or as in economic growth in these particular areas, is very poor. Schooling is very poor, education is very poor, health conditions are very poor, overcrowding is very high, unemployment is very high. So every socioeconomic indicator that you can think of that would contribute, to contribute towards what you might term as, again, it's a contentious term, but ghettoization means that there is generational poverty. Generational poverty that is passed on from one generation to another. Why? Because role modeling, education isn't seen the way as out of it. Your way out of it is that you're starting on a minus, and you have to be quite exceptional to swim against the tide to be able to break out of that sort of flow, as it were. And so in these major heavily populated cities, so for the connection from that and the British Muslim organizations in these areas, vast majority of these organizations and that sit there are bricks and mortar, but do not have the relevant contextual leadership to play a strong role in helping, supporting these communities break out of the cycle of poverty and break out of the sort of insular approaches that have existed and these sort of things. Now, change is taking place, but it's nowhere near at the rate in which that the population is growing, that side of things. And so I answered your prison population question, right?
Yes. Is that the Muslim population right now?
Which one? Yes. No, this is the overall.
Overall.
Yeah. So I don't, but there is research around that. And the other thing is that, look, these are the figures on the prison population. Look, it is alarming that we're three times our national average in terms of prison populations. And again, younger populations in prison is even higher. Okay? So there are major societal challenges if we're going to be able to live up to the prophetic example of leadership that we spoke about in that sort of thing. There are major challenges. And to break this down even further, youth provision, as in work streams, work effort to help young people in these particular areas within this infrastructure is pretty much non-existent at this moment in time. You start, you go madrasa, you do the basic reading, then they don't see him again at their critical stages, and it comes to a later stage in life, and you're dealing with the problem because your early intervention didn't exist, wasn't a part of that process, and then that's why you've ended up in a very disenfranchised youth. If I can make that, just give one. During the riots in our mosque in Solihull, you know, it's a lovely area and all the rest of it. It was so nice that Keir Starmer decided to come and visit us because it was. Is this being broadcast? Yeah, I won't say the next line then. I was going to say that he was too scared to go to Birmingham, so then he came to Solihull, right? Anyway, we had a small. There was a little far right march, as it were, and the word got out that they were coming to the masjid. It was misinformation. It was purely misinformation that this was going to happen. It wasn't the case, and I turned up at the masjid about 8 o'clock. There was about 20, 30, 40 youth there, largely from Birmingham and surrounding areas to Cayman, because they heard that the mosque was being attacked, and they came to protect and stand in solidarity and all the rest of it. So on the one hand, it's a major act of solidarity, saying that we're going to defend our places of worship. I got there about 8 o'clock. By 8:30, there was about 500 youth that had turned up from Birmingham within half an hour space. And I went, wow, how did you mobilize? How do you go from 20, 40 youth to 500 in the space of half an hour? They said that they were in a WhatsApp group, which is about 2,000 of them, and they were all ready to mobilize in counter the threats that were sort of taking place. And that took place throughout the week in Birmingham, as it were. So when young people want to move into action, they move very, very quickly. Somewhat naively, I would say, because there wasn't the level of threat there, but they felt in their heart that they needed to move into action, as it were, and demonstrated that. But when we tried to have a conversation with our young people, we realized that they were self-mobilized, self-organized, and they had their own structures, and they weren't going to listen to some borderline uncle stage person like myself. I say borderline because I still fit in both camps.
Okay, we've got like a lot of questions where people put their names.
I'll keep it a lot shorter this time.
Assalamu
alaikum. The question I want to ask is, you mentioned about the intergenerational gap,
yes,
which developed, and then probably the problems that you see in the youth stem from there. So if you can see what are the factors which created this gap. And the second thing you mentioned about the succession plan, so that the youth come in and then the reform or whatever good can be done for the next generation. So these two questions connected. What led to this gap, and then what are the steps needed to pass on to the succession, as you say it?
No, really good question, Uncle. Mostly our centers are based on tradition. That's why I started this thing. Based on tradition as we understood it from South Asia, from wherever, where people have migrated from. The challenge is that those traditional structures are, I would say, not relevantly applicable and suitable for the context that we've got at this moment in time. So they were established by first generation community, and a huge amount of credit goes out to that. But what I've seen where there was intergenerational changes taking place, where the elders felt that to welcome the next generation of community coming into the space, then there was a harmonious working together of the vision and the mission of the founding fathers of organizations, founding community, but successfully recognizing that we need to integrate the changes within our society, within our community, and bringing other community, other organizations, other generations on side. Where that's been done successfully, you will see a thriving institution. Where you see it not done successfully, unfortunately, which is the vast majority, you will see a complete disconnect. And then when you deal with analysis of the challenges, the effectiveness of being able to just impart knowledge based on, a Friday khutbah or a German or sermon or something of that nature isn't sufficient, because there's a disconnect. There's a complete and utter disconnect. And so when younger generations have got involved with institutions, then there's been a much more effective institution place that's been able to do that fulfillment. The complacency of not upgrading our models has been a challenge, where organizations and institutions have implemented that change. You're seeing a thriving, bustling, relevant, inclusive, dynamic organization, because young people with their ideas and so forth are coming with new waves, new understanding, and new dimensions. That's really, really key and critical, because we all know at least every decade or so that major changes take place. And if you don't upgrade your systems, just like, a decade ago, a phone was very out of context to today. And if you apply that to institutions, the thriving ones are the ones that have dynamic leadership, contextual leadership that is inclusive of diverse schools, diverse views, diverse spectrums of ideas, and bringing that forward, and to be able to make sure that enables such a change. Next. Khadija. You've got one sister at the back as well. Sorry.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. The kind of beginning of your talk, you kind of painted quite a bleak picture of where the Muslim community is currently, and I know the end, is more aspirational. And some of the stuff that you focus on, low kind of social mobility, low kind of socioeconomic prospects, traditional practices, etc. Some of it is external, some of it's internal. I guess it does feel like it feeds into a lot of kind of Islamophobic narratives about Muslims. High birth rates, influx of migration coupled with very high levels of crime, etc. How do we talk about, I guess, some of these kind of very real issues that are internal as well as external, but having a kind of internal impact as well, without kind of falling into this trap? And how can we be kind of self-critical without, feeding into Islamophobia?
Yeah, no, it's a really tough one, because it's a really good question, sister. It's a really good question. Look, drug crime is a very big issue in Birmingham and many other cities. It's not tackled. It's brushed under the carpet. It is disproportionately impacting Muslim communities and all the rest of it. Discussing that would feed into wider challenging areas. Not dealing with it has catastrophic impact. Breakdown of families, community, the social acceptance of something that's so harmful to society operates at quite a linear sort of manner in this way. So it is a major challenge in that. Again, early intervention, young people. So if we take, again, at this moment in time, we're conducting a piece of research with Goldsmith University Faith and Civil Society Unit, on youth provision within the Muslim communities, called Muslim Youth Futures. And hopefully it'll be launched within the first quarter of 2025, in which that you look at what do young people from the age of 15 to 25 across these cities, what are their aspirations, what do they want to see, what are they currently seeing, and where are the gaps in that space. If we don't have those honest conversations within, internally, then that does not really accurately enable us to get a proper grip on what's in existence and what isn't in existence. But we do run the risk of feeding into the tropes that exist out there that fuel further Islamophobia and discrimination, as it were. So it's a really difficult balancing act, but I think we're in this balancing act because, I would say, neglect and the lack of upgrading our social infrastructure that we know that has a really, really powerful role to play within society, based on prophetic tradition, based on our understanding, and based on the fact that when tested, it's definitely played that role, but there is quite a journey to go at this moment in time. But where we can highlight examples of success, the two that I'm sorry, I'm being a bit Midlands-centric here today, because I've unplugged from London and I've gone back to my home roots in Birmingham, even though Rash here reminds me that I live in Solihull and I'm married to the mayor of Solihull, so that's a different, I have this bipolar situation going on in my life at this moment in time. But the reality is that the social infrastructure, the community social infrastructure that exists within our communities is a critical component to strengthening our British Muslim civil society infrastructure. It's a critical component that has a phenomenal social change power. Okay, that's the premise here. But at the moment, it's extremely underutilized, and therefore we're playing catch-up at that respect.
Okay, and we've got 3 questions. I'll take the last 3 questions. 1, 2, 3. Go.
Assalamu alaikum. So kind of leading from what Khadija just said. So your concentration on the talk was that modernizing the mosques, if you like, and the institution of the mosque. So so depending upon how you look at it, how does that actually impact the social mobility of the wider society, of the Muslim population, if you like? I mean, Birmingham probably has got one of the highest affluent Muslim population there. So what we did is a structure not necessarily contained within, so upgrading or getting the institutions to be run by young generations, and modernizing them to equipments and things like that doesn't necessarily solve the problem of the civil society. So what we really need is a think tank of how do you actually get that civil society, uplift them, if you get my meaning.
Yeah, so, just to make it, I'm certain, just to make it clear, there has to be a multi-pronged approach here, absolutely. My own observation, reflection is that we have very, very important social community infrastructure that exists that left to its own devices and not invested in will end up in that talk in which that Justin Welby is giving, beyond bricks and mortar and building communities. I'd recommend that if you can attend that lecture, or it's probably going to be online as well. Theos is the organization that I believe, Miqdad, correct me if I'm wrong, that established after when Tony Blair was asked the question and Alistair Campbell replied that we don't do God. So Theos as an organization came up and established itself after that sort of time frame, providing the practical theological framing, thought leadership to how making Christianity very relevant in today's context. So that thought leadership is absolutely key and critical. Practical implementation of that within a community setting, these centres here are still critical in enabling social change to take place, because they are a place of point of connection from all aspects of, especially from statutory bodies, from service providers, from the NHS to police to you name it, across all of what typically deals with social infrastructure.
Within any of these organizations, if you look at the overall population, the youths, what percentage of those youths actually engage with those institutions?
Very limited.
Yeah, exactly.
Very limited.
So that's the issue I'm trying to get to. Is we need to get out there and set some institute, whatever it is, that actually tackles those issues.
Absolutely.
And I know it's not a Muslim problem; it's a societal problem.
Yeah.
You have that in Brixton and other places, and also within the white community, you have the same issues.
Yeah. So sort of, I don't want to call it the youth problem, but we call it the untapped potential of young people. If we look at it from an asset-based approach as opposed to a deficit one, we look at the untapped potential of young people within these communities. How we reach them is going to require a major creative approaches from a number of ways in which that we ensure that fundamentally we don't lose them to the social ills of society. Then that would be an extremely expensive, painful process in which that we've kind of, as a result of, fundamentally what I'm saying, as a result of neglect, our institutional neglect, we've left these young people behind. And that really needs a major upgrade in order for us to be able to do that. That doesn't mean to say that we get them all into our centres, but that does say that we, as a centre, recognise the problem and play our part in enabling that to happen, as it were. Jamil, I think it was Jamil or sister? Oh, thank you for the tea.
Right. Assalamu alaikum for your talk. I'm just saying that it's very sad to see that Muslim people have troubled, in the prisons within the past 10 years. This is bringing a lot of racism, amongst the English people and the Muslim. That's why they get this Islamophobia, that we've taken the tax money of over £600 million is used per year, and that money can be utilised in hospitals and that. My concern is what help is given to them. Is the council providing any counselling service? And the mosques, a lot of people are willing to do voluntary work, to lift them up, because they're in a vicious circle.
Yeah.
If they're in a cycle of poverty, there's no way they can afford £5 even tuition fees.
That's right.
It's not possible, right? Their health isn't right, their brain isn't right. They need 24 hours, or at least on a daily basis, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, to say, like, you have, say, 5 students, I have five, allocate, what have you been doing today? Like a one-to-one interact. Maybe that will lift them up, because you need that interaction between those people who are lost in the society.
That's right.
And lost from the Muslim world, lost from our Muslim ethics, lost from our Muslim akhlaq.
Yeah.
So what are you going to be doing? Because there's so many mosques in Birmingham. My cousin lives there, and she said there's so many events there, blah, blah, and Ramadan is full of food. Yes, 30 days, nice food, it's overwasted. But, what are we doing to bring these back to normal common sense, so they come out of the drugs, so they get proper job? Even working in a factory, working in Tesco's is good enough than getting unemployment benefit and sleeping to 1 in the afternoon and playing snooker, for the rest of the day. Because that's what they do.
Okay. Look,
you know what? I mean, are you going to set up a committee in Birmingham? Are you, with all these mosques around, I'm sure you can have a meeting like this and say, right, we want volunteer workers. And because the Muslim state with all this Palestine is going down, there's so many people of us wanting to do voluntary work. We can't go there to Palestine, but we can do it here.
Yeah.
We can. This is a different type of torture they're getting. Drugs, poverty. So why not set up a committee within all the Muslims, forget all this Sunni, Shia, Wahhabis, blah, blah, and just come together and say, yes, this is what we're going to do. Allocate 5 students, 10 minutes, what have you been doing? like a mother, because they've missed out in their life. The parental guide or something must have happened.
That's right.
And it's only our duty, our sawab, to lift them up.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope one day this will be established.
Inshallah. I mean, I'll come back to you. Thank you, sister. But you poignantly remind us, and point to the picture that there is a sense of responsibility to be able to help these young people. And my sort of urge here is, let's reevaluate our priorities as a community to see where our efforts should lie and where we should pinpoint where the need is greatest, as it were. As a humanitarian aid worker, we used to always say, where's the greatest need? And you go there. Okay, then you work your way down. So if we sort of recognize the neglect of that greatest need, we're now paying the price for that, is my honest answer, is my honest take on it, and the organizations have an important role. But I'll come back to what we're doing. But I think that Jamil had a
final
point.
question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I'm glad it's the final-ish question, because I would like to leave all us participants in a slightly more positive frame of mind. So I think it is very, picking up one of the points the sister made, we don't want to feed in too much into the Islamophobic tropes. And looking at the 20 years trend, what's been happening in the Muslim community, there are some good news stories which we should also be celebrating. So for example, if you look at, you've been used the census quite a lot, but if you look at the census data on level of educational attainment, okay, the proportion of Muslims achieving level 4 qualification, which is degree level, has been increasing over the last 20 years, okay, which is something positive which we should celebrate. The level of Muslims in the ages of 16-24 without educational qualification has been dropping, okay? So there are many other positive things we should be celebrating. The level of, economic activity, level of unemployment has been dropping. Okay, our language proficiency has been increasing, right? If you look at question of identity, this is very interesting, coming out from the census, that 94% of British-born Muslims identify themselves with England, not necessarily with Britain, but with an English nationality, right? So there are many other things. I think we should not paint too dark a picture. And things are bad. There are social realities which we should be aware of, which you have brought to the notice. But there are some other things to celebrate as well.
No, thank you very much for Jamil for sort of reflecting on that. I'm generally speaking very optimistic, because our prophetic model is always to be optimistic in that respect, and so we certainly didn't. I just was definitely trying to paint a picture in which we're demonstrating that we've got a plethora of growing Muslim civil society institutions across the country that have a phenomenal potential, and where they've done very well in demonstrating the social change and impact that they've been able to make. It's been very noticeable, recognized by state structures and the likes, to the extent that the statutory bodies are absolutely willing to fund and enable these organizations to be a part and parcel of that architecture of change, as it were. And so I sort of leave with the fact that I think that's recognizing the challenges that we face in society today, especially with the young population across our communities and societies, that I think I would make an urge saying that let's ensure that we kind of look at our British Muslim institutions through the lens of ensuring that they have a good strategic outlook, they look at the needs of our society, they function with the service users in mind, so be able to adopt and develop services that feed into wider needs of society, so that we can be seen as beacons of positive spaces in which that can bring social change. There is one of the best faith centres I've seen in Birmingham is called the Nishkam Civic Centre. It's run by a Sikh. It was formerly a Gurdwara. It is a Gurdwara. But in addition, they've created a fully functioning civic center, as it were, that meets all of that. That is really quite probably the most noticeable one in Birmingham, as it were. Here we're illustrating strong Sikh faith tradition, strong civic engagement, and recognizing the role that it plays in enabling that social change to take place, as it were. So I think that we have a tradition of giving, of contributing, of bringing social change and caring about our society. And I think we can definitely all play a part in enabling our institutions that exist within our communities to be able for them to fulfill their potential, to ensure that we help and support as many young people, as many people as possible, especially those that are caught in a cycle of poverty, generational poverty, and changes that are taking place in that space. But of course, I would say, as an optimist, that inshallah, by God's grace and God's willing, that we can enable us to be able to help and play a positive change in that respect. Sister, where we've been seeing these generational changes take place in these community and these organizations, some of the most deprived and difficult communities, where the challenge is we haven't been able to capture the data at this moment in time of evidencing the social change and the impact, which I think is the next iteration of this journey. But I think that the examples are shining for us, and it's largely removing the sectarian lines now within that were more firmly in existence at an earlier generation. So I'm quite hopeful and positive, but I am very cognizant of the growing needs as our institutions need to understand the sort of changing dynamics of our communities.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. So sorry that I've gone over
No.
time.
Thank you very much. And sorry we have to stop the questions, but we have run out of time. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad.
Just a couple of quick announcements before we finish. Next week we have Dr. Gurda Farid Miskinzoda, who will be speaking to us on Kitab al-Irshad. The week after we have Zahar Alawi, who will be speaking to us on the Wiladat of Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam. And the week after we have Haydar Sanduq and I think someone else talking to us about the link between musical scales and Quranic recitation. Every week we do have a series of programs. Ladies Pilates on Mondays at 7:30. A yoga class for ladies every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Ladies exercise classes, cardio and Zumba at Tuesday at 7:15. Dua Kamal Surya Yasin programs every Thursday evening. Tuition classes every Saturday afternoon. And weekly tafsir classes on Sunday at 9 p.m. as well as the Soul Kitchen Food Bank, which is there on Sunday after Husseini, on Sunday as well. And we also have Husseini Madrasa, and we do have all these talks every week. So please do come, please do contribute, and inshallah you can find out more on sikkim.org.uk. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.